Hey everyone, welcome to Eerie Earfuls. It's an evil fucking room. Each episode we choose a horror movie double feature to compare and contrast for your entertainment. Fair warning, there will be spoilers. I'm Brandon.
I'm Justin.
And I'm Stephanie.
So, that third voice might sound familiar to everyone if you listen to our Babadook and Nightmare on Elm Street remake episode. That's my wife, Stephanie. She's joining us on this episode to talk with us, and we're very excited to have her. So, hi, Stephanie.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
Okay, let's get to today's double feature. The person picking the double feature rotates from episode to episode. This week was my pick, and I chose Fido and Warm Bodies. Let's pop in the synopsis tape.
Fido is a 2006 Canadian zombie comedy directed by Andrew Curry and written by Robert Chomak, Andrew Curry, and Dennis Heaton from an original story by Heaton. In a 1950s-esque alternative universe where radiation from space has turned the dead into zombies, the fallout of the resulting zombie wars has left humanity living inside fenced-off cities. Overseeing it all is ZomCon, a corporation that developed behavioral collars to control zombies' violent outbursts so they can act as servants and labor workers after death. ZomCon also develops funeral services for the wealthy, which involves the deceased being decapitated and their head buried separately to prevent them from coming back. In the town of Willard, the Robinson family is one of the only on the block that doesn't own a zombie. Early in the zombie wars, Bill Robinson, patriarch of the family, had to kill his own father and has harbored an intense fear of zombies ever since. When his wife, Helen, buys a zombie in spite of his objections, their son, Timmy, befriends the zombie, naming him Fido. One day, Fido's collar malfunctions and he accidentally kills the old woman that lives next door. Timmy buries the old woman to keep Fido out of trouble, but she returns as a zombie and infects another person before Timmy can return and kill her permanently. As the zombie outbreak spreads, ZomCon security investigates the cause, eventually tying it back to Timmy and Fido. A pair of local bullies capture Timmy and disable Fido's collar in the hopes of killing Fido and making themselves look like heroes. Instead, Fido protects Timmy in spite of his disabled collar, killing the two bullies and then hurrying away to fetch Timmy's mom. Helen arrives in time to save Timmy from the new zombified bullies, and as a result, the three grow closer and more affectionate, leaving Bill feeling alienated and excluded. ZomCon tracks down and captures Fido, but Timmy, with the help of a schoolmate and former ZomCon employee, learns he is being kept at the ZomCon headquarters and sets out to rescue him. When Helen realizes where Timmy has gone, she forces a reluctant Bill to accompany her to ZomCon headquarters to rescue Timmy. Meanwhile, Timmy is thrown outside the protective fence surrounding the city by a ZomCon employee. Bill finds Timmy and dies trying to save him, shot in a struggle over the ZomCon employee's gun. Timmy slips back inside the fence, Fido is freed, and the family returns home. Helen honors Bill's wishes for a headless funeral, and the film ends with Helen, Timmy, and Fido holding a neighborhood party and living together in domestic bliss.
Warm Bodies is a 2013 American zombie romantic comedy written and directed by Jonathan Levine and based on Isaac Marien's novel of the same name. Roughly 8 years after a zombie apocalypse, Zombie R is one among many of the hordes of undead wandering an abandoned airport. Although undead and driven to consume human flesh, R is aware of and unhappy with his situation and lives in fear of becoming a bony, zombies who have shed their skin and transformed into ravenous skeletons after losing all of their humanity. While hunting for food, R encounters humans from a nearby walled-off enclave on a mission to retrieve medical supplies. Upon seeing one of them, a girl named Julie, R's heart beats for the first time since dying. After being shot by Julie's boyfriend, R kills him and eats his brains, absorbing his memories and increasing his attraction to Julie. He wipes some zombie blood on her face to mask her scent and takes her to an airplane for safety. Although Julie is initially terrified of R, he's able to earn her trust, and as he does so, they begin to bond over music and video games, with R growing increasingly verbal and expressive. He insists Julie stay with him for a few days until it's safe. In spite of her growing affection for him, Julie grows frustrated and attempts to return home, but is caught by another swarm of zombies led by R's friend, M. R rescues Julie, but when he reveals that he killed Perry, Julie leaves him and returns home alone. M and the other zombies are initially confused by R's behavior, but eventually begin showing signs of life themselves. Inspired, R sneaks into the human enclave to find Julie and convince her that the zombies are being cured. Julie and R attempt to explain the zombie cure to Colonel Grigio, leader of the community and Julie's father, but he only threatens to kill R. Julie and R escape and meet up with M and the other zombies, but when Bonies attack, R and Julie attempt to flee, eventually leaping from a roof into a pool far below. R shields Julie from the impact with his own body, but is shot in the shoulder by Colonel Grigio. When R begins to bleed, they all realize the truth. R is fully alive again. The cure is real. The humans and zombies unite to kill off the Bonies, and the slowly reviving zombies begin integrating back into human society. The film ends with a now fully human R and Julie watching from above as the zombie apocalypse ends with the demolition of the wall surrounding the city.
Okay, so why did you pick these two movies?
So I picked these two movies because they're both zombie romances, and because of that they both have a lot of the same zombie movie tropes, and they both invert those zombie movie tropes in similar ways at times. This is in the middle of the apocalypse or post-apocalypse, and humans have learned how to exist with zombies by creating barriers to keep them out. They also involve, like, militarized governments, because the human enclave is sort of run by the same people that are protecting them, so there's sort of a military hierarchy in Warm Bodies, and ZomCon is itself sort of militarized. Like, even though they're a corporation, they have, like, their own standing army and cops that show up. So, yeah. And both of them involve the humanization of zombies. Both of them feature zombies who start out being your more traditional zombie and then end either being accepted or sort of rediscovering their humanity or reinforcing their humanity to others in some way. What traditionally has made zombies effective, and the way we traditionally use them in movies, is that their horror is in the dehumanization of being, like, just one in a crowd. It's this sort of mass gathering. Like, zombies are hordes. They're always en masse. Because we don't think of them as human, we think of them as a mass, it's conducive to, like, murderizing the hell out of zombies. Like, in Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead, when they're on the roof of the mall at one point, and they have a game going with some people across the parking lot in a different building on the roof, and it's sort of like Celebrity Where's Waldo. They're, like, writing down the names of celebrities that they think the zombies look like, and then the other person is trying to find that person in the crowd and then shoot them and kill them, and if they do, they get points. And it's a funny scene, but it's also them just sort of coldly murdering people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what did you say that was? Dawn of the Dead? Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead?
Yeah, the Zack Snyder Dawn of the Dead.
I feel like the similar thing happens in... It's the sequel to 28 Days Later. I guess it's 28 Weeks Later.
I actually did make a note of, like, zombie-adjacent movies, because part of the reason zombies are big is because around the same time that zombies got a resurgence in the early aughts, especially, like the late 90s, early aughts, was also about the same time that video games really started to take off again, and it was specifically in the era of the first-person shooter, where, like, people were hooking up their Xboxes and PlayStations and, like, killing each other online. And so, like, around the same time that, like, Call of Duty was getting, like, really, really big and taking off, we had, like, Left 4 Dead come out. And the whole draw of Left 4 Dead is just you're basically a one-person army gunning down waves of the undead. And a similar mechanic is used in, like, the Marvel movies.
It's also similar to, at the same time, that was when Plants vs. Zombies came out.
Mm-hmm.
And they were just mindless hordes coming at you. But what I think is really interesting about these two movies, to bring it back to, like, the movies that we're talking about, is that they both give zombies agency, but it's interesting in how they each do it and how they're different, because I feel like R is a, like, actualized person, and he discovers his humanity, and, you know, he can now speak, and he's warm and his heart's beating again. And while they don't have that in Fido, it is something similar, but it's not that Fido, like, discovers his humanity. It's that he becomes kind of like Lassie, like the quintessential good dog, that he knows how to play with the baby. And he does that. He fetches Timmy whenever he's, you know, is essentially trapped in the well, but, like, tied up by the bullies. He's a really good dog. And it's Fido. So he, like, becomes as intelligent as, like, a dog, because while we personify our dog, there are some things that he just knows, and he has agency, and he can make his own choices, but it's not quite to the human extent. So it's kind of more like a 50s kind of Lassie sort of movie.
I mean, I agree with you that Fido's overall structure is intentionally, like, by the title, it's really obviously meant to be playing on the boy and his dog formula. I don't know that I agree that Fido, I feel like that, in a way, misses the point of the movie, because the point of the movie is that is how everyone treats their zombies at the start of the movie. They all wear, and that's actually where I was going with the dehumanization thing, and Fido's a great example. So, in Fido, all of the zombies are basically forced into labor after they die. If you die, you're either drafted back into the labor force as a zombie, or you're rich enough to afford the special funeral where they cut your head off and bury it in 2 separate places so that you don't come back. But that's a privilege only reserved for the rich. And so all the zombies then all wear that same blue jumpsuit. They've all got the ZomCon logo like on their lapel, and that's why Timmy names him Fido. But I feel like as the movie goes on, you can tell, especially with Timmy's mom, they start thinking of Fido not as Fido a dog, but as like another member of the family. Like when they're washing the car, he's playing with them. He's washing the car, but they're also like spraying each other with the hose and stuff. He can't verbalize like R can in Warm Bodies, but I feel like there's a similar humanizing. Like there's a reason at the end of the movie he's wearing like a floral print dad shirt with like slacks and playing catch with Timmy instead of playing fetch with Timmy like he does earlier in the movie. Mm-hmm. I feel like by the end, it's not that he's discovered his humanity, which is why the distinction I was kind of trying to make. It's that they now accept his humanity, and they're willing to like let him be part of the family instead of a glorified butler.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that is really interesting. It's kind of like he goes from being kind of like just a workhorse sort of to a valued member of the family. But so it's interesting that it's yeah. I don't have anything else to say. I just agree. And I find that interesting. These movies are interesting.
I find it interesting that I agree with you.
I agree that I find it interesting.
It's also interesting that the fact that they're both male zombies are the protagonists of these movies is interesting, that they're both zombie love stories. Like they're romance movies also. Like it's the A kind of plot in one and the B plot in another. But it's interesting how they kind of characterize the male zombies' humanization. I don't know. It kind of goes back to like how one is more kind of in touch with the hormones, because R is definitely like attracted to Juliet, or Julie, sorry. It's Romeo and Juliet, because he mentions that, like he talks about it, he makes gestures, he doesn't look away whenever she's taking off her clothes because they're wet. He definitely thinks that there's something whenever he gets invited up to the bedroom. There's that kind of stuff. And it's kind of similar to Fido, but Fido doesn't necessarily express hormonal attraction to her like R does, but the reverse is kind of true, because Julie doesn't really express like necessarily like attraction towards R, but, and you'll have to forgive me, I forgot her name. Helen definitely finds Fido attractive in that he will listen and he's attentive to her needs and like everything like that. He's attentive to Timmy. He's attentive to the new baby. You know, he's present in the moment in a way that, you know, Helen's husband isn't, because he's so preoccupied with everything and money that he can't pay attention to her. So it's interesting how they're kind of like yin and yang. They're sort of reversed. But it's also interesting that the female zombie in Fido, Mr. What's his face across the street, they're all what's his face and who's his faces. It's
Mr. Theopolis.
Mr. Theopolis and Tammy. Tammy seems to be more in control, and also they kind of lead you to believe that it's Mr. Theophilus that's kind of calling the shots. But then by the end of the movie, we see that the mask is off and the curtain is drawn back, and it's really kind of Tammy who's calling the shots, where he's telling her, no, don't get up, I'll help you. And it kind of gives context to like the scene in the bedroom when she's chained up. That's not a control thing, except that it's her. She's the one in the control of this relationship.
I kind of get what you're saying. You're saying that, like, so like the Mr. Theophilus and Tammy relationship, early in the movie, the way they portray Mr. Theophilus is that he's a creepy grosso. Mm-hmm. Like, everyone judges him, even when Timmy mentions that when Helen mentions that she cares for Fido, Timmy says, like Mr. Theophilus? And she's like, no, not like him, like a friend. And then, like, there's a scene where Fido gets chained up outside, and then he looks up in the window, and you can see that Tammy's chained to the wall, and there's, like, this sort of weird, sort of 70s swinging sexy music playing, and he, like, takes his robe off and is doing this, like, cat scratch sort of motions at her. And there are all these little instances where they show their relationship, and he, like, slaps her on the ass as she's getting the paper. She's bringing him lemonade, bringing him drinks outside. But once they partner up with him to go to ZomCon to free Fido, they start to invert that relationship at least a little bit. Because, like, Mr. Theophilus makes the joke, well, I mean, if something happens to her, I'll just upgrade, get a new model, same vintage. And she gets her feelings hurt, and she looks out the window, and he goes, oh, I went and upset her. Because he knows, I don't know if Tammy's necessarily, like, in charge of the relationship, but I do think there's more give and take than the movie implies at the beginning. I think that the beginning of the movie is more of like everyone's perception of Mr. Theophilus, and then toward the end you see like he's standing in line, and he doesn't free Tammy and stick her on people. He frees someone else's zombie because Tammy's his partner that he cares about.
I guess. Didn't he talk about in that movie how he was like in a drugstore with her and she was with her parents and just happened to be the right age and had an aneurysm and plop, dropped dead, and then he was like, well, I guess she's mine now?
That's what he says. It doesn't necessarily mean it's true. You could argue, at least, that if you look at the way everyone reacts to Mr. Theophilus, an example being I mentioned whenever Tammy's getting the paper, right? And he slaps her on the ass. The response to that is that one of the zombies that's delivering the milk hurls a milk bottle at him, and it like shatters against the door, and he has to like run inside because he's gonna get attacked by this zombie. Even though the zombie's got a collar on, it's still pissed off, like, how dare you objectify her. But if you look at the way the war hero guy that's the sort of main antagonist of the movie,
Mr. Bottoms.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Bottoms. So when Mr. Bottoms is talking to Bill at one point, and this is after Helen starts to become more friendly and care about Fido, he says, your wife's pretty friendly with that zombie there, Bill. Don't let them start caring for the zombie. Didn't lead to anything but trouble. And there are obviously multiple ways to interpret it, but you could argue that Mr. Theophilus is presenting a sort of gross playboy front to everyone else to hide how he really feels about her. And you could recontextualize everything else that you see, like, for example, her being chained up as just kink, I
think that in his mind, it might be easier for him to kind of find social acceptance as just being written off as like just some weirdo, like gross guy who is perverted, Mm-hmm. It's easier to find that kind of acceptance rather than essentially being a simp for his zombie, because there's less masculinity in that, and being someone who cares about his zombie, who lets her take control. Because by the end of the movie, whenever everyone's accepting the zombies and they're at the little neighborhood picnic,
I feel like my head is going to explode. Did we watch the same movie? Jesus Christ. The most masculine thing you can do is watch a girl go punk in the supermarket and go, she's mine now. You all saw
he
it,
didn't
right?
claim her.
And then
he
he
just
put
said
a
that
collar
she
on her and took her home.
No, he didn't do that.
That's gross. That's
he
someone's
said that
daughter.
She
and
was.
He watched her go thunk and went, I can have that at home.
I'm just saying, they don't make it clear what age she is. Lots of people.
Mom?
No, lots of people go shop with their parents
Yes.
We have literally shopped with mom in our 30s.
Yes,
so.
it just seems like...
No. The implication there is 100% that, like,
gross.
she's, like, a high schooler, and he's, like...
Yes.
Like, he
still, like, even by the end of the movie, I was like, I appreciate you showing me a lot of redeeming things. I still think this is a gross character, and this is a flaw in this movie that I do not appreciate, but that's fine. You know, it's from 2006, there's gonna be problems with it, but still, like...
Yeah, I mean, I remember him saying is, found her in the grocery store, she was shopping for candy with her mom. And all of those are things that imply being younger, but don't explicitly say her age. Because you can shop with your mom at any age.
You can.
Everyone eats candy, you know. So, like, it's one of those things, and, like, she was an attractive person. And so, I'm not saying he's a good person. I'm not even saying that the interpretation is correct. You're 100% right. Like, that's sort of why I brought up the point of them all being in forced labor. They are, I don't want to say the word slavery because that has so many other implications in the United States.
Servants.
So, you know, enforced labor though, like they're definitely inscripted into this labor class without any choice because they don't have the money to buy a funeral and be properly put to rest. By that idea, though, Helen's relationship was also bad. Like, if you take that logic and you play it all the way out to its very end, the implications are horrifying, but that's true of, like, almost everything. Well, like, superheroes are fascists, and,
see,
you know.
They were real gentle with the whole Fido and Timmy's mom thing. They were very gentle. It was way less explicit than the other one because, you know, the other one actually showed a shot of the stupid fucking bedroom with people hanging up and whatever. If you want to do that, that's fine. But there's a choice, and he's doing that with his zombie. And I don't think I only watched it once. I didn't think Helen was attracted to Fido. I never got that. I never got that kind of, like, attraction. There was like a piqued interest, like, I wish I knew you when you were human. And to me, that felt a lot like, that felt so much like when you talk with somebody who has like dementia or Alzheimer's, and occasionally they have spots of clarity, and you're like, God, I wish I had known you when you were fully you and not whatever you are now. And for me, I could be wrong, but that was the whole vibe that I got from Fido, was because there's a streak of this fear of the elderly throughout the movie with Mrs. What's-Her-Face. Also the fact that nobody wants to die. Everybody's afraid of dying anyway, whatever. There's also, you know, a lot of like, you know, critiques on capitalism because literally everything is capitalized, like the government, the workforce, the zombies, the funerals. It's all the same company. I love that. It's hilarious. It's also explicitly based on Lassie Come Home, The Night of the Hunter, and Peyton Place. Those are inspirations for this film. And they're very evident even when Timmy's in trouble, you know, and the mom's like, oh, is Timmy trapped in the... And I was like, yes, of course they're going to do.
When that scene happened, I was like, this is 100% the inception of this movie. I can easily see whoever came up with the idea first, like, getting baked and being like,
oh, definitely, yeah.
What if it was like,
yes,
is Timmy stuck in a well, but instead of like Lassie's like a zombie.
Yep. But I love everything that came out of it.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, from Fido, so for me, I did not get a romantic relationship between Helen and Fido. I got more of I really wish I knew. It was more like, I don't know, not avuncular, like uncle. It didn't feel romantic to me. It felt nostalgic and like, this is a person and I feel bad for the way that we've been treating them. However, there's something there, you know, there's obviously something there that's separating us, but this is a person that I want to stay in the family. Not like Tammy, who is, I'm assuming, you know, like, I don't know. I
have 2 points related to what you were talking about, Brandon. So first I will start with the scene that you mentioned where it's when she like is putting that suit on him, Bill's suit jacket, and she says, I wish I'd known you when you were alive. So to me, the way that scene read was sort of like, you know, those romance movies that like middle-aged guys make a lot, where it's like a guy and he, like, two people meet and they are either both in a relationship or one of them is in a relationship and the other one's not, and they both want to be together, but they
like
can't
when Harry
because
met Sally.
Yeah. Oh shit, what's the one where Bill Pullman has allergies? And he's the villain of the movie because he has allergies. I don't remember what it's called.
Superman?
No. Shit. It's a romance. It's got Sandra Bullock in it, I think.
Sleepless in Seattle.
Maybe that's it.
Sleepless in Seattle has
That's
Sandra
Meg Ryan
Bullock.
and Tom Hanks.
No.
Yes, that's it. That's the one. You're right. That's an example of the type of movie I'm talking about, where like Bill Pullman is the boyfriend in the movie, and his romantic partner meets someone else who is hotter and has more chemistry, and they do the romantic comedy thing, and the movie ends with her leaving Bill Pullman because he's kind of stuffy and a stick in the mud and he's got allergies and she just doesn't vibe with him. But like, there's a lot of movies where they do that and they don't end up together. It's just sort of like, I think Brokeback Mountain is an example of one where like two people want to be together, but they can't because they have prior commitments and they love that other person too. And that's the vibe I got when she said, I wish I'd known you when you were alive. It was sort of that, we can't be together, obviously, because you're a zombie and I'm married, but we could have been together if we'd met when you were still alive before this happened. Mm-hmm. Again,
maybe it's just because Billy Connolly is so much older than her. And so when that scene played out for me, I was like, I don't feel like it's romantic. It just feels like, I don't know. It feels like a nice, because they have that whole story about how the grandparents are dead because the zombie wars and yada yada. This is a person that Timmy doesn't have a lot of, role models and stuff outside of his direct family. And so to me, it felt more like he's a lovable uncle or grandpa or some nice father-esque figure to have around. To me, it didn't feel romantic.
If we're talking about like relationships and we're talking about like Mr. Theopolis' relationship with Tammy and Helen's relationship with Fido, whatever those relationships are, there is no ethical way for them to have a relationship if we're going by like strict ethics, because they are zombies who were bought as slaves. In the same way that white people keep trying to make slave romances work, like white people just keep trying, that like maybe this time we can make a movie about a black woman slave falling in love with her white slave master because he's really not that bad deep down inside. There is no way to do that story in any ethical way, because when you purchase someone as property, they no longer have any power dynamic to be an equal in the relationship. So much like when we talked about Candyman, if you play stuff out to its full conclusion, the implications are very horrifying. But that's true of a lot of romantic comedies, even the ones that we're supposed to like Grease. The ultimate message is change who you are to fit the image that your boyfriend would like you to have. So like, romance movies are just tough to nail. I'm
pretty sure that the thesis and final conclusion that we're supposed to have from Grease isn't that, but it's Grease is the word. It's the word that you heard. It's got groove, fair. It's got meaning.
I get what you're saying. Yes, romantic things are difficult to do. And if you play them out all the way to the end, there's a lot of things to pick apart here.
And as for them being possibly romantic, my example is this. There's a scene mid to late in the movie where Fido has lived with them for a while and kind of become part of the family, kind of like a family dog, as the name of the movie might imply. But one of the sort of running stories, it's sort of like when I brought up in the last episode about planting, where Nicholas Holt's shoe and the sort of little tiny storyline that gets carried throughout Mad Max Fury Road. There's a similar thing with Helen and Bill and their intimacy. Part of it's playing on that 1950s sitcom trope of like two twin beds instead of sleeping in the same bed, because we can't see a man and a woman share a bed. That's even though they're married, and you would think that would be the situation, whatever. Anyway, conservatism is silly. But she's trying to be sort of not like sexual with Bill, but she's being sexy and sort of playful, and she puts on music and she's like trying to dance with him.
Oh, and yes, the dance.
He's always very standoffish and like, Helen, propriety. And when he does it this time, instead of just taking his word for it, she starts dancing with Fido and like giving Fido sort of not a striptease because she doesn't take any clothing off, but sort of like a dance. And she like pulls him up and like dances with him in a clear like, fine, if you won't dance with me, I'll dance with Fido, making her husband jealous.
I agree.
If it's not romantic, why is he jealous? You know?
Exactly. Well, because he's a shallow little baby man.
I'm not really sure if he was I definitely do feel like there was undertones of jealousy, but he was also disgusted because he does not see Fido as a person.
That's true.
His
That's fair.
thing. He doesn't see zombies as people. They're just formerly dead things, and they have no redeeming qualities. And so
That's
for
fair.
him, it was disgusting. And for her, she was just trying to get his attention and be like, I want you to put in your work in this marriage, because that's how marriages work. You have to, give and take. And she was using Fido, the one humanesque prop in the room, to be like, this is the thing that you don't like, and now I'm going to dance with it because I don't know what else to do to get your attention, Mr.
But imagine
Bill.
Imagine that scene playing out, and we take the Fido, metaphor pastiche spoof, and we just make it an actual dog movie. Now
Okay.
imagine Helen is trying to be romantic with Bill, and he is like, Helen, propriety. And she goes
Okay.
over to their Doberman and starts dancing with him, and he's like,
Yeah.
how dare you? I'm going to my room. It's
Well,
a weird fucking reaction.
If he thought dogs were absolutely disgusting, that dogs did not need to be in the house, number one, that dogs had no place, that all that stuff that he thinks, I feel like he would have had the same reaction. Like, you're doing this silly stuff with the dog, and what you need to do is put it outside and go to bed. Like, that's his whole thing. And so when he got shot at the end, I was like, I don't really care. Like, fuck that guy. He was annoying. Anyway. So for me, it was never, this is alluring, fancy, ooh, like dead people are so sexy. It was more like at the time I was using him as a prop to make my husband jealous, but now I am looking past my own biases and realizing that this is an actual person. Granted, is that problematic? Yes, because my friend's daughter's coming over and she's bringing her dad over by a chain. I mean, I'm not saying the movie's perfect. I'm just saying that I don't feel like there was as much romance, but also, it's also an opinion, so...
I think that there's just as much romance in this as there was in Warm Bodies. And Warm Bodies is literally Romeo and Juliet made over again. And I feel like it's just the same, because Fido is filling all the roles that she needs in a husband. He's making time for their kid. He actually likes their kid, and which is definitely not true of Timmy's actual father. He's dancing with her. He'll play catch with his kid. Like, he'll wash the car. He does all of these things.
Very fatherly things. But also he'll pay attention to Helen and the way that he pays attention to the baby and everything. It was really telling that the first thing that I'm just gonna say Timmy's dad, because I don't remember his name. Whenever she tells him, has to point blank say, "I'm pregnant," he goes, "No, you're just gaining weight." And then she says, "No, literally, feel this. It is your child kicking from my womb." He goes, "I can't afford another funeral." And that was the reaction. And I don't think we see, Fido's reaction, but the fact that he was playing with the baby at the end of the movie, shows that he cares for it, He's engaging more than what Bill would have.
Yeah. Well, the difference is that Fido, used to be, is a person. Used to have a personality and stuff. And Bill is a person that is devoid of all of those things that make people, because he kind of had to make himself that way during the zombie wars by killing his own father, and because we're in this whole macho 50s-esque era, we're not going to deal with those problems, so they just fester, and they're not ever dealt with properly, which means, when she finally is like, "This is exciting, I'm pregnant," he's like, "This isn't exciting, this is horrible, I have to plan for more expenses," that's when you're like, oh god, okay, well, we can just lose that guy.
But it's really similar to Julie's relationship with not Paris, but Perry, because he doesn't care. He doesn't want to show any affection. He might have cared at one time, just like I'm sure Bill cared for Helen at one time, but he doesn't anymore.
Yeah.
Like, he is just so obsessed with the zombie mission, or the mission of like taking something from the zombies to recover it, that he doesn't care, and he just wants to be like Juliet's father, the zombie leader.
I think that you're interpreting distance with lack of caring, and I don't think that's entirely accurate. At least my read on it was that both Bill and Perry are great examples. They're very similar characters, because both of them, because zombies are the risen dead, both of them had to kill someone who was very dear to them, and in the aftermath of having to do that, they have tried to distance themselves from all attachments, because in a world where people die pretty regularly, and there's nothing you can do about it, because, it's a violent, tougher world than it used to be, it doesn't make sense to have attachments to things, because then you just get hurt, which fits a boy and his dog story pretty well, honestly, for that formula, because it's kind of what you're doing when you get a dog, because they don't live 100 years. So at a certain point, you're getting a creature that you're going to love very, very much, but not for very long, and then you're going to be really sad. So that's sort of fitting.
But it's the zombies that took priority in their lives. They were both like to the point of
survival.
obsession. Well, survival, but also it was just the only thing that they thought about. Even whenever it's leisure time, and you see Bill reading a magazine, it's Death magazine, because that's the thing that's on his mind. He is obsessed with death, and that being the final point. And so he's not contributing to the relationship in a way that these zombies can both make Juliet and Helen their priority, their main priority. And I feel like if that's not, something that you would value in a partner, I don't know what is. Everyone wants to be someone else's priority, especially in like desperate times, whenever it's not just the men who are going through this zombie apocalypse. It's also stressful for the women. And so the only good man in a zombie apocalypse for a woman is a dead man, because they're the only ones who care about the mental health of these women.
Plus, they're quieter.
They're much quieter. It's fantastic, and you have a collar that you can zap them. It's wonderful. But I think that it's interesting that they're both zombie romances, but they're also they're kind of their times. Because I was thinking about, and I'm not going to spoil WandaVision because that's horrible, but the fact that it's a 50s kind of movie, and so it's like portrays a 50s relationship, and then Warm Bodies is a very CW, it's like a long episode of a CW show, down to even like the poppy score that they have whenever he's getting made over, because they have to have a makeover sequence, because it's a CW show. It's a teen movie.
I literally said that
T,
out
capital
loud
M, teen movie.
while I was watching the movie. Like they were in the room and they were talking about it. It was before it happened, and I was like, oh my god, is this happening? And then she was like, well, I have some makeup. And I put my arms up in the air and I went, zombie makeover!
Yes.
Because
Not
of
sad.
course
They did a terrible
They
job.
did
I
a
know.
horrible job.
He looks horrible.
He looked
looked
more
better
dead.
before they put makeup
I
on
know.
him.
He looked more dead after the makeover.
Well,
than
he certainly
it
looked
was-
more disturbing, that's for sure.
Oh, it is bad. But they're very, very similar. And the same thing happens in the other movie too, because they have to send him into, what was it, ZomCon or something, but they like put him in like the fancy, and put Fido in the fancy clothes to go infiltrate ZomCom.
No.
He had on nice clothes and stuff.
He wore a suit later because, like you said, Bill is obsessed with death, and so they were like, for weekend fun, would go hang out at funerals. So he could take pictures of, it was like his sports. Like, oh, here comes the head. Here's the thing where they say, so-and-so, from dust have you come, to dust shall you return, and from dust shall you not be resurrected. So he wore the suit there. But when he gets arrested, he gets taken to ZomCon and he's put back in the jumpsuit. Like, he's forced to do manual labor. Which, Brandon, your thing about capitalism is like spot on. That's part. Like, I actually was writing down notes about that.
Yeah, I think after I thought about it, I liked Fido more than I liked Warm Bodies, and I felt like Fido was more effective in its messaging because Fido was, it has a very distinctive tone and take. It is lampooning a very, very specific thing, from the 50s, like 50s culture that has also broadened into just American culture at general, like, American culture, or especially now we have for the past 50, 100 years or so have had, humans have always had an obsession with death, but particularly after World War II, after, the devastation caused by nuclear stuff, we've definitely been obsessed with like apocalypse and death. And so that is all very present because of course it is, because that's prime time for that stuff, is the 50s. And it's lampooning like so much capitalism and how everything in America is, capitalized basically.
Commodified.
Yeah, commodified way more than it is in literally any other country. And they make fun of that. And I like that. Warm and it's like I said, it's poking fun at like people that are constantly worried about appearances, because at the beginning of the movie when Helen was like, "Oh, you got dirt on your clothes," and I was like, I'm not gonna like her because she's gonna be one of those people that's more concerned with appearances than she is with the well-being of her son. And that's actually what kind of starts her getting Fido, is because she's jealous because they don't have a zombie like the rest of the neighbors. And then she realizes, oh, he's actually a person. This is actually helping, to me, it felt more like a dog story. Like, this has actually become, I got one because I wanted a status symbol, and now I have one because I love it, because it is a thing that I can connect with or whatever. I felt like Warm Bodies was doing the same thing. It was trying to like lampoon romantic comedies with zombies, because that was the thing, in the early 2010s, was just doing everything with zombies eventually. I just don't feel like it's as successful because it's less targeted. They spend most of this movie with this idea that I am still like, the movie frustrates me a little bit because they spend the whole movie being like, the zombies can change, they just need to be shown love, except for the bonies, and then we fucking shoot them because nothing can save them, and it's cathartic when we shoot them, and we can do it together, it's an activity. And I'm like, I have a problem with that. Also have a problem with the fact that they kind of, I'm not a huge fan of Dave Franco, as I have said before. However, he did, when they do the flashback scenes and stuff, kind of make him a pretty sympathetic character. So all I can think about the entire time is, this main character that I'm following is an asshole because he's absorbed all these memories and now he's projecting that onto her and she's like okay with it. It's this weird Beauty and the Beast situation that I don't like, but I understand why it's there because Romeo and Juliet is Beauty and the Beast and fucking whatever. I just don't feel like it's as successful because there's a lot of things that are not as well thought out in Warm Bodies as opposed to Fido. Because I think Fido's pointing towards a very specific message of what it's lampooning, and Warm Bodies is more of a generic idea, and I don't think it was thought all the way through.
I agree with you, sort of, and I disagree with you in points. I do think both that Fido feels sharper because it has a very specific movie formula that it's lampooning, and Warm Bodies is more of a genre.
Warm Body is, I was going to say Warm Bodies is too, but there's also a less specific formula with romantic comedies because,
it's sort of like Beauty and the Beast is probably the you're right, that's basically, it's a Beauty and the Beast story. It's not even really like a...
Except it's worse because, like, in the cartoon, she's like, I give myself in place of my dad, so my dad can go back to the village because she's like that. They portray her.
But there's 100 versions of Beauty and the Beast.
They portray her as like, selfless. I'm talking about the cartoon, which is the only gospel version. There's no other version. It's just the cartoon from 1990, whatever. So that, there's like an exchange, like I give myself for my father's freedom, and it doesn't do that in Warm Bodies. He was just like, I'm gonna kill this guy and eat the brain. Oh, now I like her, but if I smear you and stuff, you won't get caught and I can keep you as a pet. It feels weird.
I don't want to go too down the field of Beauty and the Beast because I feel like that's
that's probably
a whole separate conversation.
It's very similar though.
But, so I agree with you there, though, like, because even if we do say that it's a Beauty and the Beast story, in spite of the fact that there are trappings that make it a Romeo and Juliet story, like the fact that his name is R, his friend's name is M, which is Romeo and Mercutio, her boyfriend's name is Perry, Juliet's fiance was Paris, so, like, the parallels are literally intentional. But it's also not a Romeo and Juliet story, because this isn't two warring families, this is zombies and living people. But I think that, because you brought up the bonies, and that was actually one of the things I wanted to talk about, because, like I said, traditional zombie movies, the horror comes from the dehumanization, and even in Fido, you see that, like, all the zombies are forced, like I said, to wear jumpsuits and look exactly the same, and that's true of the people, too. Like, capitalism sort of squishes everything down to a specific thing that you have to be. You have to have a house, you have to have a car, you have to have 2.5 children, work for this specific thing, everyone has a zombie, so you have to make sure you have a zombie, like, and everyone becomes the same. And the more that Helen cares for Fido, in whatever capacity that is, the more that she starts to think of Fido, I would argue, as a person, and humanize him, the freer she becomes, and she begins to reclaim her own humanity. Because you're right, at the very beginning of the movie, those bullies literally point a gun at Timmy because they don't think of Timmy as a person either. And her reaction isn't, that's terrible, we need to go to the school. Her reaction was, did people see you in those clothes? But later, she fucking burns those bullies down, like, kills them and burns their house down.
That was a conflicting scene.
Because she's started to feel again. And she also, like, you see her it's reflected in her clothing. She's much more, like, covered up and buttoned up in the start of the movie. She's, like, got the dress and, like, a shawl and, like, gloves. And as the movie goes on, she becomes freer and she starts, like, exposing her back and her shoulders. And it's a more intimate way of dressing and a more personal way of dressing. It's not exact carbon copies. And she starts standing up for herself instead of being like, men, go get me a drink. She's like, get it yourself, Bill. Wow! Feminism guitar riff. But Warm Bodies is the same way, though. Like, the whole cure for the zombies is reclaiming their humanity. And the thing with the bonies is that they have literally lost what makes them human, and they have all become the same skeletal monster. They have let their condition consume them so completely that there is no human left. The rest of the zombies, what brings them back is being reminded of humanity, and, like, so they all start to integrate back into society because they start feeling again and feeling love again and being loved and thought of as people. And it's Julie and R's relationship that does that. You're also right, though, that he's a dick. Mm-hmm. This is where my problem with the movie came.
I was going to say, are you basically just saying that Warm Bodies creates a third degree of separation for dehumanization because instead of it being the zombies, it's now the bonies, which is what the zombies, they said at the beginning, that's what we turn into when we lose our whatever. But still, like, that implies in itself that there are things or people beyond help out there, which is opposite of kind of like the zombie that's playing against the very thing that Warm Bodies is trying to do, that just love will cure these people, their heart will grow 3 sizes, and they'll get to celebrate Christmas. Like, that's their whole fucking thing, except for the bonies. But
I would argue that it's because they made that choice. The zombies, in the book, they're actually called fleshies. So the fleshies, they have all been consumed by this zombie plague, but they have not given up their humanity. That's part of what makes R the protagonist that we're able to follow, because he has an inner monologue and an interior to himself. It's not just mindless consumption. He's not shuffling along going, brains. Like, he has feelings, even confliction about the very thing he's driven to do. Versus the bonies, which are zombies that have been zombies for so long that they have given up hope. They have chosen to abandon their own humanity because it's easier.
Here's something interesting. They don't just specify in Warm Bodies what caused the zombie problem, I guess, but they do describe it like it was like space stuff that caused like a radiation issue in Fido. But in Warm Bodies, who knows what it was? Probably something airborne, since there were small children that were zombies. But it's funny that what kind of could fix them is a sexually transmitted disease. And here's where I'm saying, this is where I'm coming from. So the way it was attraction that started to cure R, and he takes his first heartbeat whenever he is alone with Julie and they're listening to music and she's like teasing him and like flirting with him and kind of like it was an attraction that happened and that started the first beat of his heart. And then who's the next zombie that it goes to? His best friend, M, the person he's closest to in the world. And then by the end of the movie, we see that M has gathered a crowd of zombies behind him, zombies that he knew, and then they spread it to other zombies that they knew. So it's an STD that saves the day.
That could also just be described. That's literally the concept of paying it forward, though.
You know what,
like
Justin? But
showing
it's not
kindness.
as catchy as an STD saves the world. But it's what I'd like to have put on my tombstone one day.
You heard it here first. Warm bodies is a reverse It Follows.
Yeah.
Yes,
So-
exactly.
My thing with what you said was that they're choosing to leave their humanity behind and to become these bonies, and I don't think they are. Like, whatever this thing that's taking over them, if left untreated, will go to that. And the only thing that's saving those zombies is their whatever unfortunate, get together. That little thing, fucking situation with R and Julie. That's the thing that starts the crux of them saving. But they're not choosing to save themselves. They're not choosing to do that. They didn't even choose to become zombies. They have no idea how they became zombies. They're not choosing. That's not part of their choice, though. I don't agree that is their choosing. I think that these, in my opinion, I could be wrong. For me, it sounds a lot more like a storyline closer related to somebody that has some kind of like, I don't know, like some kind of illness, or maybe like I don't know. It's something that people don't choose. It's just a thing that you get. And if people are kind enough to you and treat you, then you can be cured. However, if people don't care about you and they feel like you're disposable, then they can just let you walk around the airport for the rest of your life until you die. So no, I don't feel like they're... I'm sorry.
I agree with you, sort of. So one of the things that when we were watching, we rewatched Warm Bodies, because the first time I watched it, I was like, that's cute. Like,
yes.
And I couldn't think of anything really to talk about until I watched Fido, and then I remembered how fucking great Fido is. So, but I wanted to rewatch Warm Bodies with the context of Fido in mind so that I could see what I thought of it the second time. And I agree with you, sort of. I still argue that the point of the movie is supposed to be that they choose life, because R could have just killed Julie, and that would have been the end of the movie. He could have seen her and been like,
yeah, I think he was just
felt those feelings
in a stage,
and he embraced them instead of pushing them away.
Right, but he was in a state of whatever the thing that was infecting, where he was still able to do that. I feel like eventually, just like in Alzheimer's, it devolves to a point where you have no control over that anymore because your brain is actively working against you. And so Alzheimer's people, they don't get to choose, well, my family showed they loved me, and so I got out of it. They eventually just die. And I'm not saying that this is the same. It's just, to me, I feel like those people got sick and they went, we don't want to associate with those people. So they put them in the airport. They built a wall around their city. And then they were like, those people can go die, eat themselves, whatever. We're the only people that are human, so we'll just repopulate.
But doctors will tell you that if you have a disease, like doctors talk about how some patients just give up and let themselves die. Mm-hmm. It's too much. It hurts too much. They're too sick. It's too hard to go on. And they basically just stop trying and die, which is what the bonies do. Like they are sick or whatever, dead, whatever the fuck happened with Warm Bodies, because it's meant to be ambiguous. But like they have reached a point where they're like, there's no hope. There is no reason to continue to care. And they embrace the emptiness of just consumption, of just being a bony. R could have done that. he doesn't want to. He's afraid of losing that humanity. It's one of his things he's afraid of. And when he sees Julie, he could push it away the same way that Perry does, because Perry also does the same thing. He pushes away love and hope and connection because it's not worth it. It's not worth it to feel because it hurts. And R could have done that too, but he didn't. He embraced it and saved Julie. Now, my issue with the movie, there were some changes done from the book to the movie. I read the book Wikipedia page. I didn't read the book. I would like to read the book, but I didn't. Warm Bodies. It's based on a novel. So I read the Wikipedia about it, and
based on the novel Push by Sapphire.
Yes, that's what I thought.
Yep, that's it. So what bothered me is the tone, at least that I got and from the Wikipedia article, is that the book's a little darker in tone. And I think the movie's tone is slightly mismanaged. I was talking with Stephanie about this because one of the things, when Warm Bodies came out, everyone was like, oh, it's like Twilight, but with zombies. But I would argue that would actually have been better because the central conflict in Twilight is that Edward Cullen has to consume blood, but doesn't want to because it hurts people. In many ways, the vampirism is like a metaphor for addiction. And I think that if they had treated the zombie's desire to eat flesh as an addiction, and treated it in that storyline, it would have made more sense. Even if they continue with the eating brains in the book, when he eats Perry's brains, it implies eventually that their souls have sort of joined, that whatever is left of R, because not everything is left, he doesn't remember his name or anything, so there are pieces of him that are just gone, that have been lost. But by eating Perry's brains, those two souls have sort of joined together and he's become more whole. And I think there's a way to do that without it being as problematic as it is, because in the book, he doesn't, at least again from the Wikipedia article, the Wikipedia article plays it like he sees Julie after he kills Perry, and because he has Perry's memories fresh in his mind, there's a moment of oh, I shouldn't kill her. That's mean. And so he chooses to save her. But there's not necessarily an affection or attraction there to speak of until later. And as they get to know each other, that attraction develops, especially as he continues to consume Perry's brains. He experiences more memories. He remembers being human, and he starts to feel attraction and feelings like romance for Julie. In the movie, he sees Julie, gets that eyes dilate, heart first love at first sight thing, and then murders the fuck out of her boyfriend, and then lies about it while still secretly eating his brains.
To be fair, though, the boyfriend did hit him first. So
yeah, it's not the eating him, it's the after that lying to her about it. Because
he wasn't lying. He told her. He didn't lie. He just didn't, he didn't choose the time that she wishes he would have chosen. She even says that she thought he did. She just, I think, assumed he did. It was just going unspoken.
Right. But the tone of the movie is so otherwise sort of gooshy, squishy, it's so sweet. And I feel like it really hand waves the fact that he is eating people.
I feel like that's what they probably would have brought up if they had made a TV show out of it. It would have gone, because is it an addiction, or as he's becoming more, rediscovering his humanity and becoming alive again, would he continue to chase that high of being able to consume human brains and get that rush of having all of the memories even while he can eat regular food, or does he not? So that's something I feel would have been made for an interesting TV show, but they didn't go full Twilight like they should have. And because of that, because they pulled back, they didn't get the CW show.
As an aside, I also feel like Warm Bodies, it feels like they made the movie and then there were places where they thought it was too dark. And so they tried to lighten the tone through reshoots and post, because there were places where the narration feels like that's definitely supposed to be there, this feels like an important moment, and then there are places where the narration feels like they were I don't know if we don't have narration, when the goats are following R as he's going to the human city, and we didn't need R to be go away, hey, get out of here, in voiceover, he's already doing that on screen, We didn't need the reinforcement of him saying it, you know, in our ears too. So I feel like there were moments where like maybe the movie was supposed to get darker. So in Romeo and Juliet, spoilers for a several 100-year-old story, Mercutio gets into a fight with Tybalt and dies. And it's because Mercutio dies that Romeo's like, fuck you, Tybalt, and goes to kill Tybalt, which causes the whole war between the Capulets and the Montagues to like heighten. And I feel like that was going to happen in Warm Bodies, because when M is standing there with a group of zombies and they're looking at that sort of vacation poster, and they all have that one heartbeat moment where they're like, oh yeah, holding hands. Remember when it was like to feel human? And then the Bonies show up. I feel like that scene was supposed to end with them dying.
Yeah, I did too.
And it didn't. Instead, he's like, oh, we got away. And I was like, how? It was literally like an inch from your face.
Yeah. It felt like, they were telling a Romeo and Juliet story, which obviously they were. But they were also trying to subvert it, not just with zombies, but with like romantic comedy expectations, because they both don't die at the end. They both live, which is not how Romeo and Juliet ends. Spoiler alert.
That's true.
Yeah, that's why I was like, I felt like the more I watched Warm Bodies, the more frustrated I got, because I was like, I feel like this is trying to say something, and it keeps getting in its own way the more it tries to say something. Like, it felt like the more it tried to say something, the more it would step on its own feet. And Fido, I felt like, was more successful because it was basically like, what do I want to lampoon? Capitalism. Okay.
Easy target.
And that's basically what they do through the whole movie. It's a lot of lampooning of capitalism. And they kind of do that in Warm Bodies, but not so much. It's also more about like squishy love, you know, like if we just love each other, we'll all get along, which is not a sentiment I can get behind. But also when they were shooting the Bonies, I was still like, oh, we're just gonna not talk about it. Anyway, those guys, they were too far gone, so we picked them off, and it was fucking cathartic. Because we teamed up and we were just like, bah, 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 and I was like, okay, that's probably the most American human part of this story. So,
I think that what's kind of interesting, and I probably should have done this because it would have made sense if you're going on a podcast about a movie to watch like the director's commentary and stuff, but I didn't do that. But I'd be interested to know and to kind of know the behind the scenes story. It feels like a movie that got a lot of like notes from the studio, like on the dailies to, you know, fix this, do that, because it feels very much like a big money maker because it was put out the same time of like Twilight, and things like that, like Zombieland. Like there were a lot of things that it's a very like, this is a hot zombie story that I bet it had a lot of trailers that were shown on, you know, ABC Family, the CW, those types of
I remember,
MTV,
yeah.
those kinds of things.
It was a big, like it came out like when I was in the middle of college, like right, you know, 2013.
Yeah.
Like right before and so it was a big deal.
It feels like it was made to make money in a way that Fido wasn't. Fido feels like a movie that was made because someone had a really good idea and wanted to commit it to screen. And I'm not saying that the people who made Warm Bodies didn't believe in their artistic journey, but there were a lot of things I could notice about very obvious product placements. Like we zoom in on the Corona beer that he hands her, that she happens to have label out. I noticed that whenever she's listening to headphones that R has, because zombies can sometimes want to listen with headphones, I guess, to their vinyl records, because that's not at all
embracing humanity. He said that the sound of vinyl sounds more alive.
But it was very clearly Audio-Technica headphones. They were definitely that totally natural scene where he's learning how to drive in their convertible BMW, and then she tells him this was a nice car. It was just it felt really commercial in a way that Fido doesn't.
So the car scene, at least I can say, is in the book. She does teach R to drive in the book. It's something that he'd wanted to do but couldn't because zombie. Anyway, you can continue. Sorry.
But yeah, so it just, I don't know. I feel like there's a big difference Fido feels like capital A art, and in a way that Warm Bodies doesn't. And I don't say that to offend the people who made it, but to a certain point,
I think you're describing an indie movie and a relatively larger budget studio movie.
Yes, I suppose, yeah. It feels less genuine, I guess. For a movie that's supposed to be about the human, like the triumph of the human spirit and, the power of love, it
feels very hollow. That was what really I picked up on, was in Warm Bodies, it's supposed to be this big celebration of like, love can build a bridge, Judd's world tour, that kind of thing. And I was like, did nobody else get that reference? Nobody ever, have you not heard the Judd song, Love Can Build a Bridge? It was that was their big song. They did a farewell tour in the 90s before they quit, and that was their big song. It was a huge deal. Anyway, Yep, very niche joke. I get it. It's late. It's 10 o'clock. Anyway.
Do another Dreamgirls joke.
Yeah. Oh, man. Anyway, yeah. No, I feel like you're right, because as I was watching Warm Bodies, I was like, I appreciate the message. Love can fix everything. It's the bridge to all blah, 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 blah. But at the same time, it was also backed up with a message of, but there are some who cannot be saved. And for those, we target practice them. It was like...
I think that... So, I think it's an okay message to say, some people don't want to be saved. Like, there are some people who have chosen shitty life paths, and you're like, man, I hope the best for you, but I can't be dragged down with you. And I feel like that's kind of what Warm Bodies is going for. I'm not saying it's a completely successful message, but that's definitely what they're going for, is that the Bonies have chosen to abandon all hope, ye who enter here, and the rest of them hadn't yet, and then eventually chose life. There is also the sort of inverse, in a way it's also an inverse of Fido, because as Fido goes along, both humans and zombies start to exhibit more individuality and start to express themselves, ending with like Carrie Ann Moss wearing like the sort of shoulderless, backless dress and being more open and smiling and being more affectionate, and Fido wearing like the floral print and, versus Warm Bodies, where it's almost like they have to reintegrate into society and they have to change their behaviors to fit what society deems appropriate, which admittedly we shouldn't necessarily extend a loving hand to flesh-eating monsters. But, I could see that message being made. But it's also very hopeful. Like, if you compare Warm Bodies, where the vast majority of the dead who have become flesh-eating monsters then come back, they're saved. Not just one. All of them, except for the Bonies that have gone too far, versus Night of the Living Dead, where everyone dies. Roll credits. Thanks, guys, for coming.
Well, but also, I'm
not saying, and that's not a diss against Night of the Living Dead. That's just a very nihilistic, sort of a very pessimistic ending. Yeah. It's like we're gonna be our own deaths. Bye, guys.
Well,
sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I was reading an article that was talking about it was basically just like the lineage of the zombie film. And at the same time, it also it was really weird because it had to basically describe the etymology of the word zombie and also describe the history of the zombie film, because the two are kind of tied, but not quite. It's so weird. It's just weird. Anyway, but yeah, you're right. So George Romero in Night of the Living Dead, even though they're not called zombies, it's what we assume they are, because
ghouls.
It matches previous depictions of what zombies were on film, which, so it just stuck. However, it did very much popularize and standardize the format that zombie films make some kind of political or socio-cultural statement. That zombies could be used for that. And, the big example is in Night of the Living Dead, the fact that the main character, or one of the main characters in the house, is black. And the whole movie is very, can be read as a representative, struggle, the civil rights movement. And even at the end, he still gets shot because it's kind of like a nihilistic view of how America is, we work so hard and then we just shoot ourselves in the foot anyway. Mm-hmm.
I don't know anything about that, as Arkansas lists all of its goddamn COVID-19 restrictions. He'll put them back, though, if there's a spike.
Anyway. That's something for another day. So George A. Romero, so before that, there was like a few zombie movies, like one or two. They weren't super popular, I don't think. But George A. Romero, he really popularized the zombie movie, but also making the zombie a political figure. So now, when the zombie is introduced, it is a very us versus them. There's some kind of take on society. And with Dawn of the Dead, it took it a step further with capitalism, with zombies walking around the mall, and we're all slaves to capitalism, blah, 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 blah. This is a really popular one. They do it in Fido, too. They do it to a certain extent in Warm Bodies. And so, yeah. It is interesting how George Romero started the fact that we should use zombies to help spread some kind of political message, and then did it, effectively. Zombies were a thing before George Romero, but George Romero really popularized politicizing zombies, and how it's a really easy way to communicate simple messages like civil rights, like, I don't know, universal health care, something like that, which you could say is something that Warm Bodies could be advocating for, because there's a whole bunch of sick people just wandering around the airport, and no one's going to help them. They're just stuck out there because, well, they got sick, and we didn't know what to do with them. Anyway.
I think all art is political. All art inherently ends up making a point. You're either reinforcing the status quo or challenging it. But I think if you compare movies from the classical zombie lineage, right? Zombie movies tend to end sadly. Like, most of the time, zombies aren't people. They're not portrayed as people. They're portrayed as either a threat, or this is what happens to us if we lose ourselves, or if we get diseases. And I know that World War Z has been read as, at least the movie, has been read as sort of like a metaphor for the, masses of refugees coming to, deprive us of our resources. But all of those typically are, fucking downers. Even if they win, they're still in the apocalypse, right? So, even if the characters survive, it's kind of like at the end of The Birds. You survived, but, what now? Versus, you get this run in the early aughts and in the, early tens, whatever the hell we're calling those,
Teens,
of,
yeah.
Fido, Warm Bodies, Shaun of the Dead, Maggie. There are these movies that start portraying zombies as more. Shaun of the Dead sticks to the structure of a zombie movie pretty closely because it's meant to be parodying your classic zombie movies. But spoilers for Shaun of the Dead, in case you're concerned. At the end of the movie, one of the things that they've done is sort of reintegrate the zombies into society, and to an extent it kind of goes Fido, and because I think that they're watching a zombie fight on TV, almost like a cockfight or like a animal fight. But there's also Sean keeps Ed in the shed because he thinks that there's still some of his friend in there, and they go and hang out and play video games. So there's clearly still some left of Ed. And there's a book series, and I've only read the first one, by Jonathan Mayberry, called the Rotten Ruin series, and it does the same thing. All of these movies at least orient around the idea of a cure. Shaun of the Dead being the sort of most distant one, but it's there a little bit. But Maggie is about Arnold Schwarzenegger trying to find the cure for zombieism for his daughter who is slowly becoming sicker. Warm Bodies, they all get cured in the end. Fido they're not so much cured as much as everyone goes, oh, right, they're people. Well, we'll stop making them slaves. But they're suddenly more hopeful. And Warm Bodies especially feels like it's so clear Warm Bodies came out in the era of Obama. It feels so weirdly hopeful at the end, at least for me, where it was look, we're all united together. Hope. We are one America, and we have united and resolved our differences, and the wall has come down, Mr. Gorbachev. I saw Warm Bodies in the theater and really enjoyed it. I was that's sweet. I didn't love it. It didn't rock my world by any means, but I liked it. And I was yeah, sweet. That was nice. I liked that. And there are people who were it's so stupid. And I was okay, but you just say that because it makes you think about Twilight, and it's trendy to hate Twilight.
Yeah.
But it's also not a perfect movie. It definitely has weird flaws that Fido
Well, yeah, well,
is
like Stephanie,
more expertly masks, maybe?
yeah, well, it's definitely, she hit it on the head when she said Fido feels like an indie movie and Warm Bodies feels like, a big studio. And that's exactly because at the time when they made Fido, nobody was really making zombie movies. And so they were like, a zombie comedy film? What the fuck you want? Okay. And, when it finally came out in 2006, it started to become more of a thing because of, of things like that, like things just started coming out more like that, like Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. It was like a whole thing. Late 2000 or the late aughts, early teens. It was like this whole, what if we did romance and dead things together? And it blew up, and so Warm Bodies is literally a product of that, because people were like, I would really like to do romantic things like Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. So one is like, I have an interesting idea I would like to poke fun at. And the other one was like, we need property to capitalize on this movement. What if we made Warm Bodies into a film? And
I mean, there was definitely an intention to capitalize on Twilight, because that was also in the heyday of Twilight. Like, Twilight came out, I think the first one was in 2007, and by the time Warm Bodies came out, I think Eclipse had come out, maybe Breaking Dawn Part 1, but like, it was in the heyday of Twilight. So like, it was definitely a decision of like, what other paranormal romances can we do? Zombies, do that.
Yep. For me, Fido felt more like a story about old people, like and capitalism in general. Like, you don't get to retire anymore. You work until you die, and then even after you die, you still work. And Warm Bodies, felt like it was like, what if we did a message of love, but kind of
I agree.
Yeah.
I like Warm Bodies ultimately. Like, I mean, that's why I picked it. I tend not to pick movies I don't like, but
you pick movies I don't like, that's for sure.
It definitely had a more like hopeful Obama era. Everything's gonna be all right, which plays very differently after the 2016 through 2020 years.
It sure does. Okay, I think that about does it. If you want to join the discussion and share your own thoughts with us, hit us up online. We're on Twitter at Eerie_Earfuls. Our email is eerie.earfuls@gmail.com, and our website is eerieearfuls, all one word, .com.
You can subscribe to us on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and many other places. If you like the show, spread the word. And if you're feeling extra generous, we'd love if you left us a review.
Our theme music is Baba Yaga by Kevin MacLeod. Our synopsis music is Anxiety and Night of Chaos, also both by Kevin MacLeod. All licensed under a Creative Commons 3.0 license. Find more music at incompetech.com. Thank you for listening, and stay scared, everyone.
Not a plant scene in this movie.
A plant.
Because of Plants vs. Zombies. Which is probably how the Bonies got out of control, because there were no plants to rein them in.
That's true.
Probably. So the lessons that we learned from these zombie films is eat more vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. All right.